Mary drank some tea and ate a little toast and some marmalade. "You wrap up warm and run out and play, you," said Martha. "It'll do you good and give you some stomach for your meat." Mary went to the window. There were gardens and paths and big trees, but everything looked dull and wintry.
Carrie, it's been so lovely to have you with us this week at Audible.
It's been lovely to be here.
The Secret Garden.
Yes.
One of your favourite books, a book that you've enjoyed over the years?
Yeah, I mean, it was a story I read when I was a child, and, growing up, I was always fascinated with this idea of, just having a little secret place of your own. And I feel like it's just one of those stories that sort of embedded itself in people's minds. And yeah, it's just such a beloved story.
I can remember, as a kid, watching the film of The Secret Garden over and over again, like some kind of weirdo. Have you seen the film? Were you
Yes.
the same?
Yeah, I watched it when I was a kid, and I rewatched it again when I found out that I was going to be narrating the audiobook. And, I mean, Maggie Smith is she's just the best in everything. If Maggie Smith is in the film, she is going to be the best in the film. That's kind of, you just have to accept that and move on with your life. She's great.
So for people that haven't read it before or who haven't seen the film, can you just give me a brief overview as to the plot of the book and some of the main characters?
So the story follows a little girl called Mary Lennox who grew up in India, and she has tragically lost both of her parents, and so she's brought over to England to stay with her uncle, who is Mr. Craven, and he owns this very big stately homes that famously has 100 rooms that are all shut up. And she's brought into this house in the middle of Yorkshire, and she's just very out of place, and she's a very stubborn little girl who's always had everything done for her. Everything's been handed to her on a silver platter, and all of a sudden she doesn't live in that world anymore. And so it's about her sort of coming to terms with being a child, really, being a normal little girl who should be outside and playing in the gardens of this house and getting fresh air and not having people do everything for you. She now has to learn to do things for herself. But in the house is Colin Craven, who is her cousin that she didn't really know existed, and he thinks he's going to die. He's got this very morbid sense of life, and he's always been told that he's a very ill, weak little boy and he's going to die, and that's it. And he's just completely accepted the fact that he's going to die. And through finding his mother's secret garden, they bring the garden to life, and subsequently both Mary and Colin come to life themselves, and it's just such a gorgeous story.
What a cracking summary! I feel like you've thought about that. That's it's impressive. It's a kind of nice story because you see the development of the characters, right? Because as you say, when you meet Mary at the beginning, she's not the nicest kid. Yeah. But then, do you think by the end, you see a nice little girl that's going to grow up into a nice young woman?
Definitely. I think one of the lovely things that Frances Hodgson Burnett put into the book is so many things that happen to people without them really realising that it's happening. Just these changes in personality or these changes in thought processes that sort of, especially when you're a child, just happen to you and you just accept them as a kid. You just accept that that's the way you think now and you don't think about how you used to be. And there's so much in the book like that, these little changes of people and personalities that just happen to them. And I think by the end of the book she has gone on this huge journey but doesn't really think she's gone on this huge journey because she's this 10-year-old little girl and life's just happening.
What have been the particular challenges of narrating this audiobook? I think there are some characters that you've had to voice. There's some accents that maybe have been a bit new for you.
Yeah. I was told I'd be doing a northern accent, a Yorkshire accent, and it's one of those things where I was like, yeah, I can do a northern accent, and then suddenly realised, have I actually ever done a northern accent in front of any other human being before in my life? And the answer was no. And I suddenly had this huge fear that maybe what I thought is a Yorkshire accent isn't a Yorkshire accent. So I suddenly had this, oh God, am I going to be able to do this? But it was all fine, and it was great fun. Ben Weatherstaff, in particular, who is one of the gardeners in Mr. Craven's house, he has a very thick Yorkshire accent, to the point where written down, it doesn't look like English. So there were a few times where we had to stop and sort of decipher what he was actually saying, because it's lots of tuts, northern tuts, and thas and thyselfs. So it's all like very old school Yorkshire. So we did have to sit down every now and again and figure out what was actually being said.
Let's watch a little bit of you doing the different voices, including the northern accent.
Martha found her coat and hat for her and a pair of stout little boots, and she showed her way downstairs. "If the goes round that way, they'll come to Tut Gardens," she said, pointing to a gate in a wall of shrubbery. "There's lots of flowers in summertime, but there's nothing blooming now." She seemed to hesitate a second before she added, "One of Tut Gardens is locked up. No one has been in it for 10 years.
And so, how does it work when you're preparing for an audiobook? Because I know this isn't the first one you've done.
Mm-hmm. The first thing I usually do is read the book, obviously. Even though I'd read it as a kid, I bought a gorgeous version of it, a nice little hardback version, which I read again. And then it's about getting a list of the characters and figuring out exactly how all of them are going to sound and what accents they all had. But even then, sometimes when you do get into the booth and you're reading the book, sometimes there's a character that's in one scene who says one line that you completely missed. And so you're like, oh no, where are they from? Quick, how do I figure out what voice
I need
they've
another
got?
northern accent somewhere, yeah.
And obviously as well, when it's one person reading the book, I have my one voice. I've got a female voice, that is my voice. And so then when you've got 6 men in a book, you've then got to come up with 6 different male voices. So it does take a little bit of time to sit and figure out exactly how all of them are going to sound and how you can make them sound different from each other when they're all talking together in one scene to make it clear for the listener who's talking.
I guess as well there needs to be consistency. Like if there's a character really early on that then turns up again at the end, you can't just suddenly give it a different voice. There has to be a level of consistency between voices.
And also it takes a few days to record the entirety of a book. So it always helps. I had an amazing director, Leo Wetter. He was so brilliant. So it always helps to sort of listen to what you did the day before and how you made the character sound yesterday to make sure that when you're back in the booth today, they sound the same as the recording before. Otherwise, people will be listening to the book and get halfway through and be like, that's not how she sounded 3 chapters ago. Here was another locked door added to the 100 in the strange house. Mr. Craven had it shut when his wife died so sudden. He won't let no one go inside. It was her garden. Oh, there's Mrs. Medlock's bell ringing. I must run.
We met a couple of years ago when you were doing the audiobook of your own novel.
Yeah.
How different was it doing someone else's novel compared to doing your own?
Feels like there's a lot more pressure when you're doing someone else's novel. When it's your own book, you have lived with those characters for so long and you've heard their voices in your own head. You know how all of them sound or how you intended them to sound when you were writing their dialogue. But then when you're given somebody else's work, it feels like someone else is just handing you their child and making you look after it at the best that you can. And so you don't want to drop it. you don't want to screw it up. So there is a lot of pressure, which is why you then put in so much effort before you go into the booth to make sure that you're going to do it the justice it deserves. She looked at the key quite a long time. She turned it over and over and thought about it. As I have said before, she was not a child who had been trained to ask permission or consult her elders about things. All she thought about the key was that if it was the key to the closed garden and she could find out where the door was, she could perhaps open it and see what was inside the walls and what had happened to the old rose trees.